This is the chart for 8 o'clock my time, 8 p.m. German time. And as you can see, we have a Scorpio rising. So how very apt is that? Also, Mercury is at the cusp of the 8th house. So Mercury is very strong in Gemini, lo and behold. And in the 8th house, it's all about digging deep, you know. So let's all dig deep, dive deep under and be like a dog with a bone. So, you know, circle around the block several times. I'm a Taurus, by the way, so that's very apt because it's all about doing things again and again and again and again till you got the hang of it. All right, so let's start with the very difficult question. And I was amazed when I proposed, first of all, to the German publisher, how about the idea of writing a book on the 8th house? And he said, well, super, because there isn't really anything out there, which was surprising for me as well. There is one book from 1996, which is all about the myth, the Greek myth of Pandora and what the 8th house means, and so on and so forth. But I decided to shed light on this very difficult and cumbersome house from as many angles as possible. And myself being a psychotherapist, my forte is psychological astrology, and this year gave me a brilliant opportunity to approach this particular topic also from a more classical angle, or even from a Hellenistic angle, because I was so inspired by Lynn Bell's lecture. So what always gets me is how clients, how students react whenever they have, for example, a transit coming, or if they realize, oh, I have, I don't know, Pluto in the 8th house, or I have met someone with a full 8th house. Do you advise me against dating him or her? Or woe is me, on my new solar return chart, I have the sun in the 8th house, which, by the way, is the case with me. You know, I am under a very fresh solar return with Virgo rising in my normal birth chart. I have Virgo rising, so that's always significant if we have the same rising sign again, wouldn't you agree? But this time I have the Virgo ascendant sitting right on my birth chart, Pluto. I said, wow, so that's going to be an interesting year. And being quite the expert there, I was not tempted to say, oh my God, who is going to die? Is my mum dying? Is my dad dying? Is my partner dying? Am I, you know, ooh. So I should say, no, come on, just take a deep breath and just realize that when the solar sun is in the 8th house, something's got to go, something is to die, but not literally, but more, it could be in any way. So we really need to stretch our imagination. So, and we will learn that it's never only about dying. It's never only about saying goodbye to someone, to something, maybe to a chapter in our lives, but also under that, you know, a veneer, under a veneer, under a veneer, under a veneer, or just around the corner is the new opportunity. But we really need to bite the bullet, and we can't be lily-livered because the 8th house is not a nice place. It's not a fun place. It's a place where most of us would associate, well, it's all about death, right? or if you do tarot and you get this card, death, then as I said before, it's just, oh, okay, woe is me. And it's almost like fear. And in my everyday counseling and therapeutic work, and I do a lot of couple therapy, I'm quite often confronted with fear. And if you will, fear is a sort of negative energy. So something goes inert inside. It's sort of, RuPaul calls it the inner saboteur. I quite like that picture. And if you are going to attend my workshop, RuPaul and RuPaul's Drag Race, for example, are amongst the many, many charts about whom I'm going to talk, because it's all about grasping your courage and trying not to be intimidated by the mere image of death. By the way, when I grew up, we didn't have Halloween or so in Germany. And I don't know, for about 20 years or so, it has become the thing, like bigger and bigger and bigger with each year. And being in costume, being a bit like sexy, seductive. And I thought, well, this is interesting, because the idea of celebrating something which is scary, which is spooky, which should put the fear in us, has become something playful, something, you know, we can celebrate. And I think that's very interesting. Another big topic which always springs to mind when thinking about the 8th house, of course, is money. And I call it the values of others. And it's more about inheritances. I had a talk the other day with someone from the UK, and I asked her, well, is that a word? Like the plural, inheritances? She said, yeah. I said, oh, wow, lucky me. So it's not only one inheritance, but more than one. So you can be the beneficiary of several inheritances. But this is always mixed luck. And by the way, as a psychotherapist, I'm oftentimes dealing with other people's emotions, surely. And sometimes people are absolutely blown away by experiencing their feelings and how mixed they are. It's all a big old mess. It's contradictory. And it can be very draining. So undergoing a therapy can really, really be draining, can be confusing. But if you soldier through and get to encounter your shadow, because the 8th house is all about shadow work. And shadow doesn't mean this is evil, how very, very dare you. No, it's about, like, we all have sides to our character, sometimes best hidden away. I don't know. I myself am a very moody person. And so my partner always says, it's, oh, wow, it's like playing the lottery. You never know which Martin you are going to get. Like, is he in a sunny mood? Is he, you know, not in a good mood? But, you know, it can also change on an instant. But also, if you embrace, own everything which your 8th house represents, you by all means will become a more authentic, a more fully rounded person, and necessarily so more polarizing. As I said before, it's not a nice house. And well, I mean, I would argue that I don't find nice people very interesting in the first place. I don't seem to attract nice person. I seem to attract people who are multifaceted. I have Venus as a ruler of my MC in the 8th house with Saturn sitting on it. So it's sort of my vocation to dig deep. And let me tell you at this point, because some of you might think, well, you know, the 8th house, yeah, interesting, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, I don't have any placement in the 8th house. So does this have any influence on my personal chart at all? And the answer, of course, is yes, it does. Because even if you don't have a proper, you know, placement, a planet or a node or Black Moon Lilith, and so on and so forth, in your 8th house, of course, you always have a ruler. And even if the 8th house, if the sign in the 8th house is intercepted, it would make it all the more interesting, because you would have like a main ruler and then an intercepted ruler. And if you shed some light on the ruler of your 8th house, what aspects does it receive? Does it form? And in which house is it placed? So this is going to be the house, the area in our lives where we will experience all the sorry, this is so intense. I just, you know, swallow. Hold on. Excuse me. Where you might experience all the difficult dimensions which we are going to shed light on. All right, so let's start in Old Greece, because Hellenistic astrology has become very, very popular again. And for me, as a psychological astrologer, it was quite a stretch to get into this kind of thinking. But when it comes to the 8th house, that was a big winner for me. So many of you might be familiar with Hellenistic astrology. So the old Greeks called the first house of the horoscopos, which is where all the energy of the native is placed. And as the Hellenistic astrologers didn't allow aspects like the half sextile or the quincunx, but only like the main angles, we must have a look at which houses are, so to speak, not getting into any sort of interaction with the first house, with the horoscopos. And for example, the 8th house, called Epicataphora, meaning descend into the underworld or casting down. And please note that, you know, the kata, we also find in catastrophe and in catharsis. So this is a place which doesn't have any contact to the horoscopos, and thus was greatly feared by the old Greeks. And let's have a look at why. So from a modern psychological view on that, because I love to work with the quincunx, I love to work with the yod. I have lectured many a time on that. This is one of my favorite aspects, the quincunx. And if you just take it in for a second, okay, so it's not a 180 aspect, it's not an opposition. So we don't have like someone like, what do you want? Hey, what's up? Oi, mate, what's happening here? And you're forced to, you know, it's all about friction. The 180-degree aspect is all about direct friction. And if you are lucky enough and soldier through, you might find a compromise, because an opposition often comes in the form of relation problem, whereas the 150-degree angle is a sort of crooked angle. So it's like you have to like shift your neck. This is really uncomfortable. And I would like to, okay, I see you, I see you, but, you know, it's troublesome. It's a bit like, have you ever, maybe, you know, when traveling on public transport or so, and you were so is that person looking at me? And then you shift your head and the other person, no, 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 blah, 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 blah. You said, what? I mean, am I crazy? I feel like someone's watching me, which is really uncomfortable. Or if you wear glasses or shades and you have a spot on it, and that will follow you, you know, just, oh, it makes you crazy and you just want to wipe it off and it doesn't go away. So the very nature of the quincunx is that we are nervous, we don't know what's going on, there is a sort of inner tension, something's boiling up, and then again it might not, it might go away like that. There is a certain yearning, because if you just, you know, in terms of which signs in the zodiac form a natural 150-degree crooked angle, for example, Aries, you know, of course we have cardinal fire, would form quincunx to Scorpio, which is fixed water. They have nothing in common whatsoever. And Virgo, which is mutable earth, again, nothing in common whatsoever. And you know, you can play this game with all the angles. And also, oftentimes we do attract people with a sun sign in an opposite relationship to our own, which is where the term opposites attract comes from. But I don't know about you guys, but I have a stellium in Aries. I have many placements in Taurus. And whenever I encounter strong Scorpio or Libra people, I'm intrigued, because this is like the tension, the friction I seek. Whereas, for example, Sagittarius or what else? Hold on. So when we count in Taurus, that would be, yeah, I mean, that's funny. So you really, really should look at your 150-degree relationships and try to let it sink in why this is slightly uncomfortable, right? So let's get back to why this house was so important and so much feared by the old Greeks. Because if you follow the sun, you could argue that at noon, when the sun is at the MC, this is where the sun is like right above. And then in the 9th house, it's still rather high up. And then when it comes into the 8th house, this is an angle which is very, very uncomfortable. It's like really hurtful. And you want to, you know, you want to, just go away. Just don't blind me. And in the Mediterranean we have, well, I mean, not in Germany, obviously, because we have such rotten weather, but the further south you travel, people would make siesta. They would close the shops. They would seek the cool and the shade of indoors. So what we have here is an extreme. On the one hand side, the 8th house is extremely bright. And on the other hand, it's extremely dark. So either way, it's extreme. And since it's so extreme, it's also occult. And occult means something is hidden. Something is hidden. And I mean, of course, I'm a psychotherapist, and it's not even that I have to ask so many probing questions, but I find with my placements in the 8th house, for example, Venus, people open to me quite easily, which makes my therapeutic work easier, of course. And I don't know if you've ever experienced the difference between, and we often carry this past with us from our childhood with unresolved issues with our parents, where in which we might have felt they didn't love us unconditionally, but their love always came with a condition, like, I only love you if you behave like that. So you'll be a good boy. Don't be a naughty boy. You know, I mean, you get the picture, and so on and so forth. Whereas in a relationship, and I mean, have you ever thought about what the difference is between the 7th house, which is the house where we encounter? It's our house where we get to do window shopping, and there is the possibility of meeting many, many people. And of course, it's the public at large, but also it's open enemies in classic astrology. But it's only in the 8th house where we get to experience intimacy, where people get under our skin. I think this is a very strong image, wouldn't you agree? Somebody is coming under my skin. And any one of you who has experienced the deep pain of being unhappy in love or being rejected by another person, to have their heart broken, to fall out of love. And that's a very interesting image also, because, for example, Lucifer is a fallen angel. So Lucifer used to be an angel like other angels, like Michael, archangel, is that a word? Yeah, Erzengel in German. And the sun, if we allow that, is like, okay, falling from the MC through the 9th, through the 8th, through the 7th, and then, you know, down under, if you will. So this whole experience of there is something which is occult, and we want to lift the lid. We want to get past the veil. We want to get past the pain, and we want to know what our significant others have in store in terms of shadow. Like, and I mean, this is how I would argue. I don't know about you, but I would always argue that you cannot like love somebody if you don't know about his or her faults. This by no means necessitates that I would argue that there mustn't be any sort of secrets in any relationship. No. It's not like that at all. I think some things are best hidden away. Some people are so deeply traumatized that the lid is so, you know, it's, you know, I mean, it can't be lifted. It just can't be lifted. And maybe the time is not ripe, because you always have to respect other people's resistance to open up. So I would always argue it's best to let others open if they are in the right mood. So time, there has to be the right time, the right slot. And I remember when I was in my teens and 20s, I was so very, very impatient. And now, I mean, I'm still a very impatient person, but sometimes, especially when I'm dealing with people who are dear to me, or clients with whom I have built a very, you know, intimate relationship, I can be very, very allowing and just, okay, there is the right time. And also because we will learn that the 8th house is also about boundary crossing, about trespassing. And I don't know if you've ever come across people like that who are just like so annoying, because after every second question, you might want to just say, what? I'm sorry, this is none of your business. Just no. But some people are so brilliant in, like, you know, snooping around, and they might have a seductive side to themselves. And after that, you might find yourself like, oh my God, what have I told this person? I just feel like I've stripped like after a poker game, and I felt like, just, you know, and you might feel so vulnerable. And you, on the other hand, have no clue who that person is. And this person might have sucked out your energy, and you would feel, oh my God, this is so very annoying. But since this person was so seductive, you have to be on your guard, because the 8th house can come in many facets, and it's not about evil again. And I cannot emphasize this too much. Sometimes we attribute something, you know, like, only just because we don't know what we're dealing with, what the other person's like, that has to be evil, that has to be bad, that has to be forbidden, and so on and so forth. More often than not, that's not the case. We just have to allow a certain ambivalence. That's a very good word for the 8th house as well. This is a picture painted by Winston Churchill in a mourning period, because he lost his youngest daughter, Marigold, when she was only 3 years old. And he sat for days and days in his garden painting this pond. And he told his wife that what he found so fascinating about this pond was, of course, that through all, you know, it's a sort of like the reflection always changes. And he found that fascinating. And he later said that he needed this time. He needed to come to terms with this dead, because mourning is a very, very draining process. And interestingly so, Winston Churchill had Neptune in the 8th house. So wouldn't you agree that this is a very apt form of him allowing the 8th house coming into his life by a Neptunian experience? So like by the shifting surface of this pond. And also, I mean, the 8th house is Scorpio, and Scorpio is fixed water. So any kind of water, hold on, now I have that later, never mind. So any kind of water which might be very, very deep, and it's murky, it's muddy, it might even be smelly. There might be weird creatures at the bottom of this, you know, whatever, standing water. So this is a very apt description of what the 8th house can be to us. So it's just like, so we are fascinated by it, and we want to explore what this house has in for us. But on the other hand, we can't see through it because it's so mysterious. It changes all the time. It's muddy, it's murky. So here again, this is the phenomenon. And I would like to invite you to play around with these extremes, because the 8th house has a lot to do with polarizing experiences. It's never lukewarm, nice, easy peasy lemon squeezy experience. No, it's It's always intense. That's a very good word also when talking about the 8th house. It's an intense area in our life. And this is a quote from Haruki Murakami: where there is light, there must be shadow. Where there is shadow, there must be light. There is no shadow without light, and no light without shadow. So we're dealing here with investigation. And of course, this is where what I'm always strongly for as a psychotherapist. It's about self-exploration. Like, who am I? Also, this shadow work oftentimes requires that we say, oh, okay, I need a break, and I need to look back at my life. Which are the paths that have led me to where I'm standing now? Because sometimes in life, when we experience a crisis, sorry, I always get this wrong, crises and crises. I think it's very German, because we have for each and every thing a precise word. So it's always, okay, say again, crises, crisis. Anyway, I'm losing my train of thoughts, which is not 8th house, you know, just bite in and be back on track. So maybe we need to go and rewind. Maybe we have taken a wrong turn. Maybe we need to reevaluate some of our decisions, because in my everyday therapeutic work, and even more often when I do an astrological reading, it's about people come to me when they're at their wits' end, when they need guidance, but at the same time, they more often than not come to me with a subconscious. So it's like something's popping up from the unconsciousness into their consciousness, and all they need is someone neutral, a total stranger, who would, by the means of their chart, tell them, okay, honey, I see these issues, and judging from, you know, your transits or your solar return or your progressions, or if you have the orrery, the time might be right for this and that. And they say, oh my God, how did you know that? And I said, well, you know, and even if it's a decision which is not pleasant, they had that coming beforehand. So my role, if you will, is like shedding light on their subconscious issues they would bring into the consultation, right? So of course, it's all about mysteries, it's all about secrets, and sometimes secrets are sweet, bittersweet. Sometimes they can suffocate us, especially if it's things we have experienced as children and we couldn't cope with that, obviously, because we were children. And I wouldn't even go so far, because that's a term for my taste used a wee bit too often, traumatic experiences. And the 8th house, of course, is alluring by way of it's all drama, drama, drama. No, sometimes the little slides, sometimes a certain message which we have heard repeatedly as a child will form roots in our own subconsciousness. And as an adult, these voices to which we were exposed as children become our own voices. So don't do this, don't do that. No, 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 ba, ba, ba. Or you mustn't be this, you mustn't be that. So our inner cosmos of inner voices, or as RuPaul puts it, our inner saboteur, can be so strong that we wouldn't doubt these messages. And what I find fascinating is that we as adults tend to experience again and again and again and again similar experiences we had experienced as children, not because they are so invigorating and joyful and pleasant, no, just because they are familiar. We are creatures of habit that comes with the territory, and it's very hard to break habits. I mean, anybody who has quit smoking, or, you know, name it, you got it, has experienced how hard it is to, you know, just don't do it. And of course, we function not so well when it's all about, you mustn't do that. It's more pleasant. And of course, I'm talking as a fully fledged Taurus here. It's always nicer if you have an incentive, like, I'm trying to do less of that, and my reward would be, you know, this and that, and so on and so forth. So sometimes we have to be tricky, and in a consultation, I mean, I'm sure you all have experienced that if you do consultation, that if it's a very, very dire topic, and because sometimes I do work with humor, I think humor can be very helpful at times to get the message across in a different way and to create a certain distance to a very dramatic experience or to a problem which might be too entangled. By the way, we will talk about entanglements, because that's a very, very important issue when we're dealing with the 8th house. So yeah, use humor. So I've come across this book. My partner gave that to me because it's a bit my own childhood. In German, it says, "My shadow is pink." So obviously it's about shadow, but this is not like an evil shadow. So the shadow is not black, but it's a boy who enjoys dressing up as a girl. And his father is very worried about him because when he starts school, the teacher sends out invitations to all the children, like, hooray, next week is going to be your very first day at school. How exciting. So please come and wear your favorite outfit. And the boy just says, okay, that's easy. My favorite outfit is my yellow dress. And the father said, do you really think this is a good idea? And the boy said, why? And she said, you know, you never know how the other children might react, but he, you know, he allows his son to go there, donning his yellow skirt, dress, all the same. Of course, what the reaction is amazement, like, wow, this is so weird. None of these children have ever come across, pun intended, a cross-dressing child. And he is so taken aback that he goes back home very, very sad. And his father has a good talking to him and said, well, listen, son, each and every one of us, be it a child, be it an adult, has a certain side to him or her, which he or she doesn't want other people to see. It's a secret, it's a shadow, and your shadow just happens to be pink. So the color for boys is blue and not pink, and your shadow is pink. And if you want to soldier through with this, I got you, son, I got you. So what he does is he dresses up, again, pun intended, in a dress the very next day and escorts his son to school. So there you have it. And the text says, we stick together, my dad and I, and our shadows get along great. So I think this is a beautiful story, and it happens to be my story as well. And I needed, I don't know, 30 years or so before I could come to terms with that side to me, because I discovered drag and had a brilliant time. And it wasn't that I discovered, oh, I want to be a woman, I want to be in drag all the time. No, it was just this one facet of myself, which I was never allowed to experience as a little boy. So I sort of felt like I owed this experience, this drag queen experience, to this part of my own inner child, to make peace. And I love this book so much, because this is a brilliant example of how parents can approach a hidden agenda they sort of feel that their children have, and that, well, I mean, in this case, it was an obvious thingy, because obviously this boy was allowed to run around in female attire at home. But this is an 8th house story, right? Okay, another turn we have to allow, and I'm not one who forces his belief systems onto other people, but I have always, even as a child, believed in reincarnation, because somehow that made sense. It made sense because I thought, well, it's such a waste of experience if we only get to circle around the block once. So it's not more astonishing to be born several times than be born once. So the 8th house is all about resurrection, is about being in contact with another world, however you define that. So the 8th house is about sexuality, so where the soul enters the body, and also where the soul leaves the body again. So this is Epicataphora, casting down and being reborn again. Sorry, let me take a sip. You know, of course, you won't find anything about sexuality and self-exploration in a Hellenistic book, you know, about the meaning of the houses, because even if I'm sure they had experienced that, they didn't have any means to talk about that the way we talk about it today. So there you have it. This is some of the work of Aubry Beardsley, a guy of whom I will talk in my workshop, who was so scandalous in the Victorian era. And he worked with Oscar Wilde, by the way. And these images were so innovative and shocking at the same time. And he only got to live till 25, and he knew that he would die prematurely, so he worked every night. He was obsessed by his art, and he was obsessed by getting a reaction because this is what the 8th house can also be, you know, something goes under my skin, but vice versa. I want to go under the skin of others as well. So it's about provocation. It's about, okay, what now? So there's no shying away from it. It's very, very, very intriguing. If you shift an 8 on the side, you will have this pattern. And this is my everyday work when I work with couples, because I always tell them, not you, each other are the enemy, because it's always about guilt tripping the other one. You did this and that, and I never forgave you. And but yeah, but you, and boo. And I always try to explain it that not they are the enemy, but the enemy is the toxic pattern. And the pattern can be like this. Every time you look at me and give me, you know, evils or raise your tone or whatever, this and that happens with me, and you get this reaction, and that reaction gets another reaction out of you. And all of a sudden you're in a roller coaster. And as the therapist, you have to sort of slowly break up these patterns and dig deep. And digging deep in that sense always means I'm working with their communication. So what kind of language do they use? Do they actually know how to talk about their feelings? Have they ever spoken about how disappointed they were that they didn't get the person that they fell in love to? So this is all very, very important about the 8th house, right? So this is what ancient cultures thought, what happens after death. And this is why corpses were buried with coins on their closed eyelids or on their lips, because people in the ancient cultures thought that you have to pay a ferryman, Charon, who would carry you over the river Styx into the underworld. And if you don't have the means to pay him, you end up in a sort of like twilight zone where the soul can't find peace. And this is what in the ancient world was what was feared the most. So it wasn't necessarily, oh my God. And, you know, I'm using the term God here consciously. It's what if I'm not doing it correctly? I might end up gibbeting and flibbeting in this horrible world. I mean, look at Dante and Dante's Inferno and the many, many layers of hell he wrote about. It's very fascinating. Also, I'd like to invite you to look at the opposite house. So the 2nd house is our resources, our talents, my own values, the boundaries of my own body, the reassurance of everything material, the fence, the soil, the well-laid table, pleasure and pain of my own body. I want things to stay as they are right now, but if you switch the coin, you end up in the 8th house, and then it's hidden talents, inner resources. It's my own values meet the values of others. So the I and the you become an us. And that can never be a playful, easy task, because something has to die in order to have a shared aura, if you will. So it's about boundary crossings, the unknown behind material manifestations. And it's the pleasure and pain in sexual encounters with others, as opposed to sexual pleasures I find, you know, with my own body. Intimacy and intensity can be life-altering, so nothing stays the same. It's the system, the pond, the compost heap. Okay, And since the 8th house is the second house of other people, it's also the values of others. And this is why we land right in debts, obligations, and I owe you and you owe me. This is very strong stuff, coming to think of it, because well, I don't know. I've had a conversation about that the other day, and I was asked, like, if I believe that people in a relationship give and take equally. And I said, actually, I don't think so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is more on the giver side and less on the receiver side might find that an uncomfortable situation, because some people are by nature more giving than others, but sometimes a situation can get stuck and it becomes more and more uneven. That's oftentimes when people show up in my, on my couch. So, so I have to talk with them about, okay, so what do you think your partner owes you? Or where has your partner gone amiss? So, yeah, reincarnation, we had that before. Well, I mean, the fascinating thing is foreigners like to put German history in one of two boxes. So it's either about the Nazi time, or it's about Eastern Germany and the secret police and so on and so forth. And I live in East Berlin, so that used to be the Democratic Republic of Germany. And the most horrible thing, and I mean, of course, me being a Taurus, is the mere idea that disinheritance. This is a deed of disinheritance. It says that this company, I think it's a glass maker, Alt Eberhard Jäger and Ilmenau, you are informed that you are disenfranchised, and that your former company now belongs to the state and the people. Horrible. I mean, imagine that. And this is very much the 8th house. And if you have a look at Germany, the German Reich from 1871, which was, after the French-German War, a very, very cruel war. So the German Reich came with a baggage. Then we have the Weimar Republic. Then we have the two Germanys after the war. And then, of course, we have the reunification chart of Germany. And in each of these charts, you will encounter a very, very hefty placement of either Saturn or even Pluto in the 8th house. So it's all about collective guilt. It's all about, something isn't feeling too cheerful. Something is feeling very, very severe. Something is not fixed by means of there are unresolved issues, right? Okay, because this is a very, very popular movie, and I get confronted with that all the time. It's called The Lives of Others, and it was a very popular movie in Germany as well. And it's a story about an artist's couple where she gets to spy on her partner and gets to commit suicide. So stuff like that happened all the time. But this is really, this is sort of like, as a native German, when you travel abroad, this is how you would get confronted. Like, oh, okay, you are German, so tell us about this part of your history, right? I looked up the definition of crises, plural. So crises are, and I crossed out simply, a change in the events that comprise the day-to-day life of a person and those in their close circle, such as the loss of a job, extreme financial hardship, substance addiction, abuse, and other situations that are life-altering and require action that is outside the normal daily routine. A person going through a crisis, experiences a state of mental and emotional disequilibrium. That's a dramatic word, isn't it? Disequilibrium, in which the ego struggles to balance both internal and external demands. In this case, said person resorts to coping mechanisms to deal with the stress. Various coping mechanisms include high emotions, defense mechanisms, making rash decisions and acting out, or putting things on hold. Yeah. Do I want to talk about Judgment Day? No. Yeah, crime and underworld, because that's a very hefty topic about the 8th house as well. Because if you have a closer look at the charts of well-known criminals, they would come with a hefty 8th house. And if you watch a documentary or so, or read a book, because I always find these sort of guys very, very fascinating, they often come with a limited ability of seeing where they went wrong. It's these boundary crossings. It's like, I wanted to have that, so I took it. I mean, think of Boris Becker these days. And his fall from grace. And I think the judge told him, I don't see any sort of remorse at all. No. And that's one of the reasons why she came up with a comparatively harsh sentence, because he's going to spend his time in jail in the second most severe prison in the UK. Interesting. Okay. As you can see, I sometimes include graffitis, mostly taken in London. I used to live in London, and I like the idea of a graffiti because they are sometimes so brilliantly done, literally art. And if you go there a week later, it might be sprayed over. So I always make sure that I make a picture, because it can be gone like that. And this is a very, very powerful picture, because sometimes, and I did psychodrama for 10 years, so this can be like inner voices, just like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. And also projections. And I always say you cannot not project, because this is the name of the game. Life is so complex, and our own psyche is under such pressure that we have to outsource certain personality traits, and we project that on other people, right? Okay, I think since I don't have that much time left, I want to end. So just very quickly: drama, purging, rotting processes, resurrection, know thyself, self-conquest, unexpected treasures, resilience. I love that picture. This is like the essence of inner strength. So I wanted, and this is an 8th house experience, is shedding skin. Yeah, snakes shed skin. And this is the chart on which I want to end, because just to show you the many facets, and they all can come in the form of a crisis, which would necessitate self-conquest, and that would allow us to experience transformation. For that, we need resilience. I love that word. It's very strong therapeutic lingo. Sorry. And so transformation, resilience. So yeah. If you, and of course, I would love to see as many of you again for my 4 hours workshop at the 27th, I think. We will have brilliant examples, you know, Queen Victoria and her youngest daughter, Adolf Eichmann, Doris Day, Truman Capote, Tab Hunter, Kaiser Wilhelm, RuPaul, some of them, John Dee, and they all had very, very flashy 8th house experiences. And you will find that they don't necessarily have a placement in the 8th house, but they had either the ruler of the 8th house in a significant position in the chart, and or they experienced an 8th house activation by a transit. Okay, on that note, can I hand over to you again, and you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna I'm gonna feed you some questions, and I wanted to let all of you know that I am putting in the chat box the link to Martin's workshop. So it's pretty easy to find on our website, but just in case you wanted it right now, you can find the link to his workshop right there in the chat box. Okay, we have some questions for you. We actually had a few questions on the subject of the nodes, so I thought I would give you all of those together. Okay. I'll tell you all the questions, but then I can feed them to you individually if needed, but just so you have a rounded view of the questions. So we have one person, Dorothy's asking if you can speak about the upcoming total eclipse in Scorpio that's coming up on May the 15th or 16th. And then we have another, Deborah would like to hear about the lunar nodes in the 8th and the 2nd house. And then Ivy would also like to know about an 8th house north node.
Okay, I'm going to fetch my book. Because there is a chapter about placements in the 8th house. And let me have a glimpse. I'm sitting on the cushion. So off the top of my head, and this is a wee bit like, you know, having nodes in Scorpio Taurus, it's about letting go as opposed to holding on. So if you have the South node in the 8th house, it's quite probable that you have experienced incarnations where you had been deeply entangled in other people's business and have had experiences of dramatic, life-altering, you know, stuff. And you would come into this world with a view of, oh, let's be careful, right? And your aim, your karma, if you will, in this incarnation, like, you know, swimming towards the 2nd house, is to, okay, let's have a look at the bright side. Let's try to build up trust, because the 8th house can be about mistrust, if that makes any sense to you. And in the 2nd house, you are engaged, you are invited to look at the fertile side of life. You are invited to build your own, in marketing, you would say your own brand, and be more independent of other people's drama. And if you switch that, these are oftentimes people with the South node in the 2nd house who have a hard time in letting go. And they would, of course, become, the older they get, dramatically entangled in the affairs of other people, and they are invited to be fearless, to, okay, let's have it full Monty. I'm just, plunging into that. So these people become more and more adventurous, whereas with the other part, it's more, they become more and more at ease. So, and of course, I'm talking like really extremes here. So does that answer the question?
I'll give you all time to let us know in the chat box, and I'm going to feed you some more questions.
Yes, please do.
So we have a question from Donna about when you have a stellium, like 4 planets in the 8th house.
All right, I have a stellium myself. It spreads from the 8th into the 9th house. And I think you have to be very, very careful, because people with a stellium are oftentimes very self-absorbed, and not in a narcissistic way. It's just that there is so much going on, and so many planets are intertwined with each other's affairs, that you really, really need your time to get to the bottom of things, like woo, 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 woo. And this goes on and on and on. A stellium is, by definition, I would argue, the most powerful aspect pattern there is, because the conjunction is the most powerful aspect, because 2 planets influence each other so intensely that they can't live without each other. And if you have 3 or 4 or even 5, then whoa, you have a whole bunch of them, and they're always like fighting, and who has the upper hand, and who gets to have a say in this or that matter. And you would oftentimes experience that the first planet, the leader, is very powerful, or the one in the middle. And if that's in the 8th house, I would argue that these people need desperately a time out from intensity. My advice would always be, try to find time in your life to look at stuff from the light side. Use humor. Try to talk to people who bring, cheekiness, lightness in your life, and so counterbalance, because you, by definition, are an intense person and would experience everything in an intense way. This is fine, but that's draining also. I mean, I would argue that the majority of other people don't find it pleasurable to be confronted with that intensity. So I think a good mantra would be to try to be less intense, and in other moments allow that. It's just like, you are a very complex, complicated, ambivalent person, and you have a right to be so. So don't let anybody tell you, oh, come on, just, easy peasy lemon squeezy. No, it's not the way you experience that. But of course you can try to counterbalance that. Okay. 5 new messages.
Okay. Why were Hellenistic astrologers so dark in their 8th house interpretations?
Well, I think it's even the same with classical astrology, and I think you have to allow to put yourself in the frame of mind in the ancient Roman and Greek period, and even before Uranus was discovered, because and most of all Pluto, 1930, and later on Chiron, 1977, because the concept of self-exploration and the psychological angle of trying to better ourselves and becoming a richer person, blah, 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 blah. This is comparatively new if we just, you know, compare it with the whole history of humankind. And in the olden days, people didn't go to an astrologer to ask them, okay, look into my soul. What do you see? I want self-exploration. No, they wanted like really concrete stuff about the harvest, about marriage, about children, about health, so on and so forth. This is why the language of classical astrology oftentimes comes with detriment and beneficial and blah, 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 blah. And I myself find orrery extremely fascinating, which of course boils it down to that sort of lingo. And I think it's a stretch. I think it's a huge stretch. So from my experience, I think it's easier if you start with classical or Hellenistic astrology and then dive into psychological astrology, then vice versa. Because if you have learned astrology from a psychological angle, it's not that judgmental, it's not that black and white, it's more open. And to become more into, is it good or bad, that's a bigger stretch for me. Okay.
Right. Sean's asking, what rulers do you use for the 8th house? Pluto and Mars, or just Pluto?
Sorry?
For rulership of the 8th house?
Yeah. I don't work with collective rulers, but I work with individual rulers. So a birth chart, an individual birth chart, and by the way, I work with Placidus, so houses can vary in the extreme by way of how big or small they are. So I will always deal with the individual ruler of the 8th house. For example, my 8th house, the cusp is in Aries, so the ruler is Mars, and my Mars is in the 9th house. So my 8th and 9th are intertwined, and I have Venus in the 8th house, and my MC is in Taurus, so ruler of the 10th in the 8th, and also my 3rd house is Libra, so it's ruler of the 2nd. And well, you know, I mean, if we're dealing with Mercury and Venus, that's of course more complex because more cusps will necessarily be involved. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. We have a lot of questions and I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them. So I'm actually going to go with the questions that are general and instead of any questions that are related to a personal chart. But I would say that if you can, to sign up for Martin's workshop, because it's a longer period of time. And I know that Martin's going to be talking more about natal charts there. So I apologize if we can't get to all of the questions, but we'll cover as much as we can. So we have a question about the 8th house is directly related to the depth of Scorpio. Do you think that we can say someone whose sun is in the 8th house also has characteristics of Scorpio?
That's a very, very interesting question. You know, so I'm writing at the moment a book in German about the sun and father issues, and in English about the moon and mother issues. And I often encounter case studies where either the sun or the moon, so one of the luminaries, is in the 8th house. And I oftentimes find that either the father or the mother was sort of difficult to get in closer contact. So remain the sort of riddle. There's something detached, mysterious, dramatic about the father in the case of the son. And I oftentimes think that people with the sun in the 8th house, so long story short, so I mean, what's the difference between a sun in Scorpio and a sun in 8? Okay, so a sun in Scorpio is a person who tends naturally to be a passionate person, who tends by definition to be a probing person, who pushes your buttons, because what Scorpio as a water sign seeks is emotional contact. And what a Scorpio person fears mostly is to get hurt by other people. So he or she, the sun in Scorpio, always seeks reassurance. Who am I dealing with? Come on, show yourself. Oi, come on, who are you? And on the other hand, shy away from opening up themselves in closer context because they are so mistrustful, because they fear to get hurt. That's Sun in Scorpio. Whereas Sun in the 8th house, for example, it could be a Libra sun in the 8th house. So this person might, in a very charming, friendly, diplomatic way, have a very probing side to it, and might deal in their life with all the facets which the 8th house brings to the table. So investigation, the values of others, crime, or in a therapeutic setting, because the 8th house is a very therapeutic setting, or you can work in finances, and that would be an 8th house issue. So in terms of father issues, I oftentimes find that there is a part of the father which remains a mystery, and it's oftentimes helpful to try to unveil this history, because I have clients who came to me and said, well, listen, I've talked with my aunt the other day, and she told me that my dad, when he was a child, experienced this and that and blah, 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 blah. Wow. And that was so helpful to me, because that explains why my dad behaved like this and that, and, you know, so on and so forth. The eclipse, I'm not an expert about eclipses, guys. I'm sorry, y'all. So please excuse me there.
We have
there
a
are
question.
So many brilliance. Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, there was a question about if you're going to talk about Pandora's myth in your workshop.
About the Pandora story, yes, to be sure, because I also do a lot of Lilith work, because I have Lilith sitting right at my MC, and I do love the Pandora story, or the Adam and Eve and Adam and Lilith story, because it's all about blaming all on a female archetype. And this whole idea of there is a treasure with secrets, and you're not supposed to peek. And of course, I mean, it's a female character. So of course, females are weak and they can't hold a secret. And this is such a cliche, but, you know, I mean, it sheds a lot of light on how archetypes came across. So when Pandora's box opens, the world experiences everything evil, from war to purgatory to hatred to, you know, name it, you got it. And the world before opening the box had been innocent. It's a sort of like before the fall. But at the very, very bottom of Pandora's box is hope. And I love that. That's so therapeutic, because if we are brave enough to face our fearful odds, our shadows, if you will, then there is hope, and we will get resilient, and we get a richer and more fully rounded person.
Okay. I know that we are at our time. I was hoping that you would say just a couple of things about what you're going to cover in the workshop.
Okay. So my plan is to share some stories with you, to circle around the block, to have like vivid material about these people, these brilliant and interesting people, and then I will take you through a journey like, okay, planets in the 8th house, rulership patterns in the 8th house, and of course I will share some insight with you by way of how to deal, because that's the title of the workshop, how to deal with your 8th house. Like, what kind of questions might come in handy if you're dealing with 8th house issues, if you find yourself trapped, entangled, disillusioned, fearful. What are therapeutic questions which you can ask yourself? Because I, as an astrologer, as a consulting astrologer, strongly believe in the power of sending clients home with some questions. So I'm not supplying all the answers. I mean, who am I? I'm not a guru, but I find it very, very helpful to accompany other people in their journey, in opening their Pandora's box, if you will. And she said, oh, it's so many questions, it's so many riddles here, but at the end of the day, I won't get upset, I won't get, discouraged, but rather like, this is interesting, because at the end of the day, we are all our own detective when it comes to unveiling layer after layer after layer, veneer after veneer after veneer of who we are and who our significant others are. And I mean, what's more thrilling than, just, light bulbs popping up, and she said, okay. And that's how the cookie crumbled. So, yeah, so that's my agenda for my workshop.
Great, thank you. There was a clarifying question earlier. You were talking about Lilith, and Caroline was asking which Lilith, the asteroid or the dark moon?
The point, the black moon, that's the Lilith I'm working with. So it's a point. It's not, it's, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm because this is one of my favorite topics, and maybe I get to talk about Lilith some other time.
Okay. And I'm going to give you one last question, and I think most of the other ones are about personal charts, and I think maybe those questions can get answered in the workshop. Maya asked if you associate a color with the 8th house.
I love that question. Are you familiar with the colors of the chakras? Because by way of, because the 8th house has a natural affinity to Mars and Pluto. I mean, it comes with the territory, and Mars is the base chakra, and it's the red chakra. This is where we are like, okay, fight or fly. It's, can we activate our inner Mars, our red? So I would argue it's red, also like the purgatory is red and sex is red, but I would say black, but a black which is sort of purple, because a dark shade of purple can come across as black, but if you shed some light on it, it's not black, it's purple. I don't know. It's just so, yeah. I mean, think of the movie, the Colored Purple, which is a very 8th house apt movie. Okay.
Okay, I think I thought I saw one. Oh, there is one more that's not like a personal placement. If you want to take this, I know I just said last one, but maybe one more. Do you think that 8th housers, I think that what you mean is people who have a prominent 8th house have a hard time dealing with times of peace?
Sorry, I have a hard time to?
Dealing with times of peace.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, how can it be otherwise? People with a strong taste of Scorpio or Pluto or the 8th house are by definition very, very intense person who would experience their lives as intense and sometimes troublesome. But I would argue they are also in the position to experience everything which is pleasurable in an intense way. So you can flip the coin here, because intensity doesn't only come in a black way, it comes in all the rainbow colors. And that's why other people might find these persons so annoying, because they are so intense in whichever they experience, which is like, oh, give me a break, just will you? So, well, I mean, it's polarizing. It's absolutely polarizing. These people can only be polarizing. They are not nice. They are not lukewarm. No, ma'am, no.
Okay. Thank you so much, Martin. This was really, really, I want to say enlightening, but it's really deep and, and intense. So I'd say if you want more of that, please join us for the workshop that Martin's going to have with Kepler College. It's going to be on May 28th, and it's a 4-hour workshop. So there will definitely be a lot more time to go into more depth on some of the questions that you have on your personal chart. And you can register on the Kepler College website. And I think that's it. So thank you again, and we'll see you. Hopefully we'll see you in the workshop.
Yes, and I think I'm going to have an interview with Callum from Kepler, who will do a Zoom with me on what the workshop will be all about. I think like 15 minutes or 20. So, and I think that will be made available as well. So if you need even more information, or, you know, so yes. Thank you so much for having me. And I always wanted to go to Seattle. I was invited to Norwalk, but then, you know, the pandemic came and it was all on Zoom, which was a great disappointment. But, you know, it's a good feeling to be connected to the rest of the world via Zoom. I mean, how brilliant is that? Yes. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And yes, we will have an interview with you and Callum, and we'll have that on our YouTube channel, so you can look out for that in the next week or so.
Super.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.